What's up, Shred Sexies? Welcome back. Death to the Fingers. I know I said in the last lesson that we were going to be working on modal chord progression ideas, but effectively I was thinking to myself, if I don't go over this basic information, which is, a continuation of the Triad workout video, a lot of people are going to get lost, and therefore, what is the point? You have to be really good at the triads first, obviously, before you start getting into manipulating the sequence with respect to the step pattern and the modes. Okay, so we'll get into that on Tuesday. But for this lesson here, this is, again, another triad workout to basically show you a methodology, again, with a backing track that I just scooped up off the internet. It's in the description box below. Thank you so much for letting us use it. The point being here is you're going to practice triads in this way, both in the sense that you're going to convert each of the families of triads, if it's from the cage system, into major, minor, diminished, or augmented. You're going to move those various triads around according to the rules of the diatonic scale. And you're going to now apply the caged system to sort of organize that information in such a way that you can then just quickly recall it as necessary when you're jamming or playing and stuff. You're like, I need an A minor chord. Boom. Here's where I am. Where's the closest A minor chord without actually having to go all the way down to the 5th fret on the low E string, right? Or the open A string, this kind of idea. So that's what we're really working on. So that's the end of the intro. Let's get into this lesson. There's a whole bunch of examples with some extra sort of practice exercises and ideas. So it's well worthwhile checking out. Let's get into it. All right, part one here, obviously, is just us rehashing one of the exercises from the original Triad workout video. In this case, we're adding in the musicality factor. I'm trying to use these arpeggios musically, but still use them in a diatonic sequence. Notice how I keep all the E types together. And then I move to the A types, and then I move to the D types, all in the key of C major, because the backing track is A minor. So in my mind, I'm like, it's A minor. That's the 6th degree of a major scale. So what major scale am I working in? That makes it C major. Bada bing, bada boom. That gives me C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major or G7, A minor, B diminished, and back to C major again. So I'm off to the races. And then, of course, I just apply the cage theory. So I get all of those chords as A-type chords. And then I get all of those chords based as D-type chords. Or I get all of those chords based as E-type chords. Now, if you don't know what that means, you need to study up a little bit more on the cage system. But the fact of the matter is if you were to play a big bar chord across 6 strings, that's an E-type chord, right? So if I just took the little tiny section at the very top, the top 3 strings, I can take that major triad now, and I can start to manipulate it by rearranging the interval structure. So instead of going 1 3 5, it would go 1 flat 3 5, and then 1 flat 3 flat 5, and then 1 3 sharp 5, and that would give me all the other types of chords related to that one. And those 4 other chords allow me to construct a diatonic scale just using that sort of triad structure. And since there are 3 notes, I get 2 other types, inversions, if you will, of this chord, where I take the first note and I move it to the end of the sequence. So instead of getting 1, 3, 5, I get 3, 5, 1, and then the next one's going to be, yes, 5, 1, 3. Then I'm back to the start again. We call those things inversions. And these inversions are incredibly important. And that's why caged is very useful, because it essentially lays out all of these inversions. But to start with, obviously, you want to use caged mixed with the diatonic sequence. And now, of course, what you want to do is start to factor in some musicality. So try to make these chords work as a music tool, if you will, rather than just strictly, you know, play one right after another. And that'll give you a better appreciation for how these things can be used both in a songwriting context and in a soloing context. Right now, listen, you can either do the arpeggios or you can play them all as one thing. Now, at the very end of, this here, you're going to hear me do just the constituent elements, play through these arpeggios, just one at a time kind of thing, for each of the cage systems. So if you're thinking, okay, well, what would I need to know to be able to do something like what they did in the improvisation at the beginning of this part? This is what you would need to be able to do. So if you can't do this part, start working on that so that you can move through each of the 3 cage systems, and then afterwards start to factor in the musical part. When you practice it with a backing track, you're starting to, you know, mess with the tempo a little bit and create sequences and whatever else it is. Right, let's get into the next section. All right, in part 2 here, essentially we've been doing a lot of up and down, right? Using just one set of strings, the top 3 or the bottom 3 or whatever it is. So it's now time to basically start to flesh out these entire arpeggio systems, right? Which again are all based around the cage system. So you can see the type of chord I'm working with, major, minor, diminished, whatever it is associated with the cage system. And the cage system follows the rules of the diatonic scale and basically expresses all of these inversions of these triads all over the fretboard. So it's a very convenient way of you just to quickly locate, to be like, oh, it's an A-type chord. I want diminished. Do this. Okay? That's how it works. It's like, fretboard location kind of situation. Move to this position on the A string. Play like an A-type chord, but do it as a diminished. Boom, put your fingers in that position. Or do, just a small fragment of that chord like we do. So again, in the improv, you hear me basically just sort of run through these actual shapes. Now, initially coming down, I just break them down in a very simple form so I can hear each one of these notes moving against it. So I really get an appreciation for the inversion aspect. And then, of course, afterwards, you hear me sort of ascend a couple times, slightly faster. Again, the idea here is I'm sort of envisioning each one of these groups, but as each note individually. And of course, by playing it like that, you get like this incredible hand workout. So not only do you get the triads, not only do you get the positions, and you'd be like, okay, this first one here, that's Aeolian again, right? So that means when you move up to the next position, that's going to be the Ionian one, right? And that lets you keep track of stuff. But of course, you really sort of start to flesh out the idea that you're like, I have all of these chords now available in this position, in the Aeolian position. When you get to the point where you're like, this sequence, I'm starting off here with the A minor. That's Aeolian. So I have this chord here in Aeolian for minor, this one, this one, this one, this one, and I have this one in the next position because I'm thinking, oh, look, there's the Aeolian position. I can move up over here and now start playing a bunch of minor chords there in the Ionian position. You see where I'm getting at? It's very easy for you to be like, oh, look, there's the A-type chord, but I'm over here. So I want to sort of hit a minor chord that's in the middle. So you're just like, boom, go to this one position and play the minor variant. So it really helps you cut down on where you are on the fretboard and just localize. But it starts off, obviously, with just breaking down these positions like I'm doing. Now, of course, there's the arpeggio section, and then you'll have to do the exact same exercises where you just ditch the pick, use your fingers, and pluck all of these chords everywhere for all the positions. And then do all the major variants, and then do all the diminished variants, and then do all of the augmented variants. You only see me actually do minor. That's just one of the four. Major, you'll be able to figure out. Augmented and diminished aren't as bad as you think because it's effectively the same two shapes repeated over and over and over again. They just flip-flop. So it's no big deal. But that you don't even need those. Major and minor, you absolutely do need. And you need to practice them too so you can develop your hearing. But I want you to figure out the major ones on your own, right? In exactly the same way, because these arpeggio shapes and the triad chords themselves are the same. It's the same information, just played two different ways. One where I strum the entire sequence all as one, and the other one where I play each note individually, right? So as long as I start to visualize this little chunk just either as one note individually or as the chord, well, there it is. It doesn't really matter, right? And then, of course, it helps me quickly differentiate. Do I want to do an arpeggio here, or do I want to play a chord? That's why I like to see them individually, because I can still see the chord. Just be like, okay, we'll play these 3 notes or these 4 notes. Done. But at the same time, I'm also like, okay, but now I can also play this arpeggio because now I've been practicing that stuff. We're good to go, right? So, but of course, you're going to do a little bit of both. Just get rid of the pick, like I said, grab your, get the fingers out and just start plucking on the strings and stuff like that. Get skilled at getting a nice even tone and moving your fingers into place. Right. So there it is. After this, of course, you'll hear me effectively run through again, like a slower version of this, but also do a small improvisation with it as well. So just another way of practicing this information where it's not necessarily with the backing track. And then we'll get into section 3. All right, here we are at the end, the final boss, I guess you could say. So essentially all I'm doing now is just taking this A minor triad sequence and I'm moving it all over the fretboard using the cage system. It's no longer following sort of the diatonic system, and I don't always stay in the same inversion. So now I'm sort of transversing all of these inversions. I start off with a G type, and then of course I move into an E type. Then I jump up to a D type, right? Finally ending up with the A type kind of deal. So that's really what you're exercising now, is this idea that you could be like, here's the A type, here's minor, and here are all the other minors relative to it. It's like if you were standing on the corner of this place in the town where you live, and I'm like, which restaurant do we want to go to? You could probably wrap off about 3 or 4, right? If I wanted pizza, oh, go here. If I wanted, you know, a burger, go here. So that's kind of the same idea, is you're starting to localize yourself and familiarize yourself with the fretboard, and the point where you're going to be able to move to one of these triad inversions with respect to whatever chord you need, major, minor, diminished, or augmented, and just latch onto it, right? Or chain them together, obviously, as you see guys like Mateus Asado do with total mastery. So it's an incredibly important skill. Tommy Emmanuel is another one that is, you know, an absolute master at chaining chords together like this. So these little triads, this is literally Hendrix 101, Stevie Ray Vaughan, dozens and dozens of guitar players, super famous songs like Under the Bridge and stuff by the Red Hot Chili Peppers, which was all the rage back in the day because people were like, how did he do that? All based around this idea of triads and whatnot, right? This is one of the most powerful techniques. And of course, I'm only showing it moving around just with the one system, minor. It's expected that you're going to expand that to the other 3, right? Which is major, diminished, and augmented, and start to mix and match those 4 elements now at will when necessary. And then, of course, if you're like, well, there's no rhyme or reason there, there is if you're starting to use the diatonic scale system. So you start here and be like, where's the next second degree, but as you know, an inversion of what I'm working on. So that's where it starts to get very, very challenging, but of course provides decades of instruction and tutelage for you just to hack around with this stuff. The better you get at it, the better a musician and a guitar player you'll be. That's the end of the story. Triads is probably outside of the minor pentatonic scale, the second most important music concept that you can learn. People are like, it's the major scale, man. It really isn't, because without the sort of harmonic structure with songs and whatnot, you're kind of dead in the water a little bit. So learning how to use these triads and stuff like that is, you know, a huge boon to any musician. I kind of skipped over it way too much. I knew about them, I was working on them, but not as much as I should have been. And here's the thing, later on, things like triad pairs, which is a music system for soloing and stuff, are just next level crazy awesome for you know, doing improvisations and whatnot. It's just a superpower with respect to the guitar, and it all sort of stems from the idea of learning these triads. Obviously the the concept is triad pairs. So I'm going to leave it at that. Start to factor in these types of ideas to your practice sessions, right? There's not much more to say besides sort of, you know, working with them in conjunction with the diatonic system, and then really breaking down each one of these sort of cage systems as far as the major chord is concerned, as far as the minor chord is concerned, as far as the diminished chord is concerned, and as far as the augmented chord is concerned. Augmented, you could wait until the very tail end, but major, minor, and diminished has to happen no matter what. There's no getting around it. And then just start to do these types of practice exercises, either where you're plucking them, you know, with your fingers, or strumming them, or you're playing them as the arpeggios. I would obviously recommend the arpeggios. Why waste the opportunity to get even more dexterity exercises? Trust me, getting your fingers into place just one at a time is effectively what you're doing when you're starting to make chords anyways, right? So just snapping them into position, starting off with just one note at a time, one after another, in a lot of ways can actually speed up the process for you to be able to play a chord, which is another reason to do the arpeggios. And of course, ear training. You get to hear each one of these notes falling to the next sequence. And that can be, again, incredibly useful in terms of training your ear to be like, okay, I'm understanding this idea of inversions. It's basically the same three notes being recycled, but it sort of cascades downwards or upwards as necessary, or whichever direction I'm going in. Done. Right? So all of these things are incredibly important, and you have to actually practice them. Even though you're like, yeah, you know, I practice my triads when I'm playing music or songs and stuff like that. No. You have to sit there and physically force yourself to use it as an improvisation tool like I do in the first example. Then you have to use it to break down the fretboard like I do in the second example. Of course, I only show minor, so don't forget major, diminished in there too. Very important. And of course, at the end, again, just using the minor triad, I start moving all over the fretboard, sort of memorizing, oh, I'm starting in the G type here, and then I'm moving into the E type, and then I'm moving into the next one. Or I could have been like, that's in the Aeolian position, basically moving backwards towards Mixolydian as the pentatonic. Then I'm into the Aeolian position as the minor pentatonic, moving up to the Ionian position. It's up to you to figure it out, right? But once you start doing that, you're like, all of these chords now are related to the Ionian position. All of these chords are related to the Aeolian position. Oh, this one goes directly with Mixolydian. And now all of a sudden, again, you're starting to see when you put a marker on the map, if you will, with respect to this information. Now, when you're doing the Mixolydian thing, you're like, I have these choices with respect to a major triad or a minor triad or whatever it is, right? And now a whole bunch of doors have opened up. You're not just sitting there being like, what should I play? You're like, I'll use the cage system and I'll just string some of these triads together, sort of, like so many great guitar players have done. Brian Setzer does it all the time with the Stray Cats, right? So there it is, another master guitar player showing you that triads are like one of the most invaluable tools, the Swiss Army knife, if you will, of the chord world. Just like the pentatonic scale is the Swiss Army knife of the scale world. Right. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate every single one of you. Practice hard. Get this information into your brain and under your fingers. Be relentless. We'll see you in the next one.